So today the 4 sessions that are scheduled. First will be GCP, that is good clinical practice, the historical background, how it evolved, and what is the definition of good clinical practice, what do we mean by good clinical practice, and the different principles involved around good clinical practice. So that will be deliberated by Dr. Shambho Samrat Samazdar. He will speak for total session duration is 35 minutes, and we are supposed to start, the schedule was 6:25, now it is already 6:28, we are 3 minutes late. So altogether the session duration is 35 minutes. I'll request Dr. Shambho to complete it in his presentation in 25 minutes so that we have some time, 7-8 minutes time to discuss any questions that are raised. Next would be Dr. Shreyoshi Dasgupta today, who will be speaking on introduction to clinical research, new drug development, and pre-licensure clinical trials and clinical trial regulations, just highlighting the salient features of the current regulations. Third will be the clinical trial operations, the key stakeholders, trial conduct steps and activities at trial site. I'll try to briefly dwell on that. And lastly, Dr. Shubdeep Sinha, who is the Vice President of VETRO India, and he will be speaking on a role of key stakeholders, the sponsor, the investigators, the site administrator, and the site administration chief, and the regulators in trial conduct and operations. This is the schedule for today. So without waiting any further, I'll request Dr. Shambho to go ahead. Dr. Shambho is, I think Rohan had already introduced Dr. Shambho. There's no need to introduce again. And the first slide also it is mentioned about his affiliations and academic background. So over to Dr. Shambho. Go ahead with good clinical practice.
Thank you very much, sir. So for next 20 to 25 minutes, I will try to cover on this good clinical practice. Specifically, we will focus on this definition of GCP, how it evolved, the evolution of GCP, and we'll explain some of the principles of GCP. Later, if time permits, we will discuss some case. So what is GCP? GCP is good clinical practice, but one R is missing here, that is the good clinical research practice. So generally it is a research practice, and the ICH definition is that it is the standard. GCP is nothing but a standard for the design, conduct, performance, monitoring, auditing, recording, analysis, and reporting of clinical trials that provides assurance that the data and the reported results are credible and accurate, and that the rights, integrity, and confidentiality of the trial subjects are protected. So this is nothing but a standard for different parts of clinical trials, and which provides assurance, two assurance. One, the results are credible and accurate, and number two, that is the subject's rights and integrity and confidentiality is protected. So this is the GCP, and there is another definition by WHO, that is the standard for clinical studies, which encompasses the design, conduct, monitoring, termination, audit, analysis, reporting, and documentation of the studies, and which ensures that, again, the studies are scientifically and ethically sound. So two parts, one is scientifically sound and another part is ethically sound, and that the clinical properties of the pharmaceutical product under investigation are properly documented. Here some debate arises, because bad science is also known to be bad ethics. So this is the WHO definition, but generally we follow the ICH definition. So there are some atrocities. How GCP evolution happened due to some knee-jerk effect from some atrocities. We need to understand these atrocities, because from these very atrocities we will learn what is ethics is, what is good clinical practice is. So first of all, you can see this picture. the Nazi war crimes. So from the here the doctors of Germany who were exposing the Jews into cold water, ice cold water, and just to see the changes that happened due to exposure to ice cold water, and they wait till those Jews die, because they decrease the temperature till the Jews die, the prisoner die. So this is, you can see how horrific it was. Next is American doctor who is taking blood from a Negro syphilis patient. This is the Tuskegee syphilis trial. So again, this African American prisoner, they were not known that they are just being seen to see the effect of syphilis in them without giving any medicine. So even after Sir Alexander Fleming had discovered penicillin, they were not have any right to take penicillin. It was available in the market from 1949, but up to 1976, they continues this trial, this syphilis trial. That means they see the patients of syphilis to see different types of primary, secondary, and tertiary manifestations. So just to see the natural history of disease of syphilis, they not give any treatment to some vulnerable populations like these African American prisoners. Next is another important and very notorious trial, that is Jews chronic disease trial. In some hospitals, they choose some ethnic group of people who are normal guy. They were not known, but they were exposed to some cancer cells from cancer patients, just to see how the normal patient's system, immune system behaves with foreign cancer cells. So again, they were not known that what they were injected. So it was known as Jews chronic disease trial. Next is the Willowbrook study. I am coming in later, but here you can see the picture of this beautiful girl. She had cilium deformity. So we all know this, that is the Phocomelia, the thalidomide disaster. This gentleman, William McBride, he had first noticed it in Australia. So he was a gynecologist. So we can see he is a other figure in the field of what we call now as pharmacovigilance. So thalidomide was used to treat nausea in pregnant women. So it was found the patients who took thalidomide, they give birth to this type of phocomelic child. So he had noticed it, he had reported it, and after that there was a thorough investigation, and it was found that thalidomide is linked with phocomelia. And I am also showing in this picture, this diagram, Dr. Kelsey. So who is she? She was felicitated here, you can see, by American President John F. Kennedy in 1962. She was the lady who had stopped the entry of thalidomide into America. She was a pharmacologist and physician. She was the head of, or we can say, in a high post in the FDA. So she had found some bad reports of this thalidomide. She was not convinced with the safety reports of thalidomide, and for that she had stopped the entrance of thalidomide into American market, and that is why she was felicitated by American president. Now coming to the Willowbrook study. Before going to that, this is the consequence of Tuskegee syphilis trial. So it was started at around 1927 like that, but you can see in it was only in the 1997 the American president that time, the Bill Clinton, she acknowledged it was a bad thing for his population. And this is the report from Jewish cancer trial, where already we had discussed how the patients without knowing exposed to cancer cells. And this is this big beautiful picture. You can see the Willowbrook State School, but something very notorious things happened there, and it was Willowbrook mentally retarded school students were exposed to hepatitis A virus, and it was the purpose of this study was to see the natural history of viral hepatitis. And again, this study was stopped and the researchers were punished. So with every atrocity, there is something good that happened also. After Nazi war crime, there was Nuremberg Code, then Declaration of Helsinki was on 1964. After that notorious Tuskegee syphilis trial, the Belmont report came in 1979, and we also can see we will discuss how the SIOMS appears. So in Belmont report, after that Tuskegee syphilis trial, 3 elements were given emphasized. Number 1, respect for person. So autonomy of the individuals, and specifically the special protection to those who are vulnerable, like what happened in the jail for those African American prisoners. So this is very important part. Second part is beneficence. We need to maximize the possible benefits. That should be the aim of any research, and minimize the possible harm. And justice is very important also. That subject should be selected fairly to ensure that the benefits and burdens of the particular clinical research are evenly distributed. So there should be an equitable distribution. And this is what I was mentioning, that on behalf of Bill Clinton, 1997, they apologized, and he had make this statement that what was done cannot be undone, but we can end the silence. We can stop turning our heads away. We can look at you in the eye and finally say, on behalf of the American people, what the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry. This was the statement from that Tuskegee trial, syphilis trial. But it was came at around 1997. So while talking about research ethics, there are 3 cardinal principles that we had discussed. Number 1, that is the autonomy, which means each person should be given the respect, time, and opportunity that necessary to make his or her own decisions. Next is beneficence, that obligates the researcher to ensure the well-being of all study participants. So in Belmont report, it was mentioned, maximize possible benefits and minimize the possible harms. And number 3 is the justice. Justice is little bit a difficult and complex ethical issue, but attempts should be made to distribute the risk and benefits fairly without bias. So who should bear the risk of a study and who should receive its benefits? Participants should not be selected due to class, socioeconomic status, or race unless justified by study objectives. So it is very important and clear cut. Very recently, there was I was exposed, or I was called for one study that is on some pharmacogenomic study, and the researcher mentioned there he want to do this study in some specific group, that is Brahman, one type of class group, to see the effects of these particular drugs on some specific pharmacogenomic activity. So first question was asked by me that whether this group you had selected has any basis. Otherwise we cannot select this type of discriminated subgroup for one study. So then the researcher had shown some evidences that yes, there are some specific genes that he want to see, and then convince the other ethics committee members, then finally get approval for that particular study. So this is very important. And now when we are talking about harmonization, the 1990s was the decade of harmonization, and this was the first time the International Conference on Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Registration of Pharmaceutical for Human Use was held at the city of Tianjin, that is in the Belgium, Brussels. So the primary participants were USA, European Union, and Japan. There were regulatory and industry representatives and observers from Canada, Australia, and Nordic countries were there. WHO acts as a facilitator. So what is the purpose of GCP? As if you can revisit the definition of GCP, the two important points for GCP is number one, the quality data plus ethics. So that is equal to GCP, good clinical practice. So what is quality data? That means that data and reported results are credible and accurate. That means quality data. And what is ethics? Ethics means rights, integrity, and confidentiality of trial subjects are protected or not. That is ethics. Again, there is a debate that whether that's and always it is to be believed that we should believe that bad science is also a bad ethics. And another important, that 2M is important for ethics. Number one, it is morality, and number two, it is materialism. So morality multiplied by materialism is equal to ethics. So if the materialism is zero, that means the design of the study, the objectives are zero, the scientific portion is zero, then ultimately the ethics equal to something multiplied by zero, that means zero. So that is why bad science is equal to bad ethics. So now coming to the ICH topics, so there are 4 broad categories: QSEM, Q for quality, S for safety, E for efficacy, and M for multidisciplinary. So in each subtopics, there are different chapters. So as we are talking about ICH GCP, the E6 is important in the efficacy part. The E6 contains that ICH GCP, and this is the general structure of that ICH GCP. You will find it from the net. I am now going to discuss on these 13 principles of GCP. So we will discuss all in little bit details. So number one GCP principle is ethical conduct. So clinical trials to be conducted in accordance with the ethical principles that have their origin in the Declaration of Helsinki, and that already we had discussed: the autonomy, the beneficence, and the justice. Number two, the risk benefit assessment. So before initiating a trial, we need to weigh the foreseeable risk and inconvenience against the anticipated benefit for the individual trial subject and society. We can initiate and continue only if the anticipated benefits justify the risk. So this is very important. Third principle, subject over science and society. So the rights, safety, and well-being of the trial subjects are the most important considerations and should prevail over the interest of science and society. It is not just like that I want to see the the natural history of hepatitis, and that is why I am taking that mentally retarded pupil and inoculated with viral hepatitis A, and to see how the viral hepatitis A affects their liver and other systems. So this is totally unethical. 4, GCP principle 4, there should be an adequate pre-existing information. The available non-clinical and clinical information on an investigational product should be there adequately to support the proposed clinical trial. As Dr. Kelsey, the lady who was in the FDA, stopped the entrance of thalidomide into the US market because she was not convinced with this type of existing data with thalidomide, and that is why she stopped that. And after that, we all know there was a amendment, a historical amendment done by FDA, that is Kefauver-Harris amendment, and again that was a historical event. So this is very important. Before going into any study, we should have some pre-existing adequate information. And principle 5, the scientific validity should be there. Clinical trials should be scientifically sound, described in a clear, detailed protocol. So science should be there. Next, I think this is why we are organizing this type of workshop, to sensitize our ethics committee, respected ethics committee members, that the importance of ethics committee. So a trial should be conducted in compliance with the protocol that has received prior institutional review board or ethics committee for their approval and favorable opinion. So independent review is very, very crucial. And also, it is not like that I am participating in one trial, so there should be adequate medical care, and that medical care given to and medical decisions made on behalf of subjects should always be the responsibility of a qualified physicians, and sometimes in case of dental trial, the qualified dentist. Principle 8, the trained and experienced personnel. So each individual involved in conducting a trial should be qualified by education, training, and experience to perform his or her respective task. So this is the training part. Informed consent. So freely given informed consent should be obtained from every subject prior to clinical trial participation. And 10th principle is all clinical trial information should be recorded, handled, and stored in a way that allows its accurate reporting, interpretation, and verification. So this principle applies to all records referenced in this guideline, irrespective of the type of the media used. So efficiency of information handling is again very crucial. Confidentiality. So this is the 11th principle, that confidentiality of the records that could identify subjects should be protected, respecting the privacy and confidentiality rules in accordance with the applicable regulatory requirements. So just giving one example, what we did today, the pre-test, all of you had completed the pre-test. Just I want to make it one study that how much of you had scored pre-test well, and how much you developed, and then I am just making one observational study and publish it in one literature. So is it ethical? It is totally unethical, because I am taking your name, you are putting your name there, and also I am not taking your consent. So confidentiality is again a very important part for any research. Next part is the drug accountability, the investigational products that should be manufactured, handled, and stored in accordance with applicable good manufacturing practice. So GMP is another part, another guidelines are there, just like DCP. So it deals with the quality of the investigational product, and they should be used in accordance with approved protocol. And finally, the GCP principle 13, that is the systems with procedures that assure the quality of every aspect of the trial, that should be implemented. So we all know about totality of evidences. In some cases we need totality of evidences. So here is totality in terms of quality. So different aspects of the trial that are essential to ensure human subject protection and the reliability of the trial, that the data generating from the trial is credible or not, that should be the focus of this system. So I am just want to go through this case that Mr. CG, 58-year-old, participate in oncology clinical trial recruited by the treating oncologist. So what we know, that traditional treatment is intermittently successful. So it was a randomized, single-blinded, placebo-controlled trial. Expected the result will get after 1 year. So what happened? After 6 months of participating in this trial, the patient not experiencing any signs of improvement, rather getting worse. And there are some preliminary data to that oncologist which suggest this particular drug is beneficial. But what happened? The doctor knows this Mr. CG is taking actually in placebo. So during an examination, when Mr. CG asked doctor whether I am in the treatment arm or the placebo arm, and also he requested doctor that if he is in the placebo arm, switching him to the treatment arm. That means the active drug, and he want to receive the possible benefits of the new treatment. So doctor knows that he is in the placebo arm. Whether he will answer to, he is bound to give the answer to the patient, and whether he can change the patients from placebo arm to treatment arm. So this is the important issue, and this requires a thorough understanding of the ethics in clinical research. So for that, we need to know that why we do clinical research: for generating useful knowledge about health and disease. So therefore, benefit to research participants is not the primary purpose of the research. Research participants are the means to developing useful knowledge and are thus at the risk of exploitation also. So we should be very clear to our research participants that while you are participating in a research, you are first a research participant. But if you are failing, if you don't want to continue yourself in the involving in the or participating in the research, clinical research, you have all right to withdraw yourself. That is very important, that information. And we always believe that informed consent, it is not only a sign after you talk with your research participants at the very first date, and after then the randomization happened and everything. Informed consent is a continuous process. So at any point, research, if the research participant wants, he can withdraw himself. So there is an important concept that is known as two-hat conflict. So while I am treating one patient, I am a prescriber or I am a treatment provider, but while I am doing one clinical research, so I am a clinical researcher. So there can be a two-hat conflict between a treating physician and a clinical researcher, but we have to deal it well. So Hellman and Hellman had described or defined this two-hat conflict like this. Consider first the initial formulation of a trial. A new agent that promises more effectiveness is the subject of the study. The control group must be given either an unsatisfactory treatment or a placebo. So even though the therapeutic value of the new agent is unproved, if physicians think it has promise, are they acting in the best interest of their patients in allowing them to be randomly assigned to the control group? So whether it is ethical. So this is the two-hat conflict. And for that, the randomization is acceptable only when an individual doctor or the investigator is genuinely unsure that which treatment is better or best for the trial participant or patient. So here he should be clinically equipoised. That means the collective professional uncertainty should be there over treatment, and that considered the soundest ethical criteria. We are not talking, we always talk about statistical equipoise, the null hypothesis like that. But from the ethical perspective, this clinical equipoise is very important. And for that, we also need to address this therapeutic misconception. It is not like that a clinical research participant, the research participants, the volunteer, they should be very clear about that. I am not participating in the trial to get treatment or to get therapeutic advantage only. So what goes awry is that the ill subject does not grasp that what she has volunteered for really is research. It can be enormously hard to shake the erroneous belief that the intervention is designed to make the volunteer better rather than contribute to anything as faceless as the medical welfare of future patients. So this was the statement by James Lindman Nelson. So this was very important. This therapeutic misconception should be cleared, and this should be cleared by informed consent document. So to summarize, GCP principles, there is one part that is ethics. The first three principles, that is ethical conduct of clinical trials, following those rules of justice, beneficence, and autonomy. Next is the benefits of the trial that justify the risk. And third is the rights, safety, and well-being of the subject should prevail. Number 2 portion is that deals with the protocol and science. That means there is a non-clinical and clinical information that support the trial. And second is the clinical trial should be scientifically sound with a clear detailed protocol. Third part is the responsibilities. There are responsibilities of IRB, IEC to approve, to initiate study. Number 2 is the medical care or by the adequately qualified physicians, and there should be a well defined education, training and experience to perform the trial task. Fourth part is that informed consent, and informed consent should be obtained from every subject before participation. Fifth part is the data quality and integrity, that is the accurate reporting, interpretation and verification of the data, protection of confidentiality of records. Next part is that investigational product, they should be manufactured, handled and stored with accordance to good manufacturing practice guideline. And next is that totality of quality control. So there should be a system in place which can ensure the quality aspect from every aspect of the trial. So I am just going one case here. You have as a clinical researcher, you have noticed that in a rural part of your state that there seems to be an excessive amounts of Crohn's disease among that Adivasi farm workers. Now you suspect that an exposure to the Mycobacteriosis aureus, which is found in crops in your state, is responsible for this outbreak of Crohn's. Now you develop an antibiotic regimen that is highly effective for this particular bacteria, and you want to conduct a placebo controlled trial to treat this patient. And you develop an informed consent in local language for those Adivasi people, and that has been approved by IRB. You hire an interpreter to help with the informed consent, and the enrollment starts. And now you find that everyone asked to enroll, and everyone is accepting, and there is 100% enrollment. But what happened? You had done one interim analysis at 6 months, and the results were not expected at all. So you walked through one of the farm worker housing units, and you noted a box with 100 vials of your carefully labeled study medication, and you found none of the seals have been broken on the vials. And you find that the study subjects all signed onto the study because they thought their job was in jeopardy if they not participate. So the interpreter did not explain what the trial was about, and to your dismay, the subjects did not read the informed consent due to their literacy issues. So this is a serious issue. So what was good here? There was the scientific reasoning was very good here. IRB approval was there before initiation. So GCP maintained, informed consent was done. It was translated in Adivasi language. It was wrongly mentioned in Spanish. So there was an Adivasi interpreter also. But what happened? What went wrong? The informed consent was not at all informed. They were vulnerable population. So there is a potential for coercion. So we need to be very careful while doing research in this vulnerable population. And translator, there is a problem with the translator. Now coming to another case.
Dr. Stambo, you have to wind up.
Yes.
You need to wind up. Yeah.
Yes, sir. So I think we can discuss these cases later. I can share the slides. So what I just want here, I can put the last case only. Then, so this is a gastroenterologist had been asked to participate in a trial of a new monoclonal antibody treatment for ulcerative colitis. One of the endpoints of this trial is mucosal healing. Then a sigmoidoscopy is performed at screening, and then after 12 weeks of study medication, if there is any improvement, then the patient can continue in the trial. The patient has returned for, one patient returned for 12-week sigmoidoscopy, and what happened? The recording equipment fails. So gastro did the sigmoidoscopy and things were better, and the patient was begging to stay in the trial. Gastro scored the endoscopic finding of being slightly better, so that the patient had a chance to stay in the trial and took pictures. But what happened? Due to the technology failure, the gastro did not have that video documentation of the sigmoidoscopy, but definitely had the pictures. So here the question is, should the patient remain in the trial? What are your responsibilities to GCP in this trial? And what is the sponsor's responsibility here? What is responsibility of the CRO is there? So we have different sessions on these topics, but what I just want to emphasize that data quality and integrity is a very critical part apart from ethical portions, and for that we need to be very cautious, because there is no place of bias into decision making, and if some technology failure happened, we need to be very cautious, and this is a responsibility for the sponsors and CROs. So quality control and quality assurance are again a very critical part of any GCP. So what is the summary of GCP? While whether one research is ethical or not, just this is the line, if we can follow: do unto others what you would like others to do unto you. So as a research participant, if you as a researcher, if you sit in the chair of research participant and see yourself as a research participant and do the research, plan the research, then I think you will get the answer more correctly, that you are going to do an ethical research or not. And for that, long back, one of our ancestors wrote in the Upanishad that Atmana Pratikulani Parishuna Samachare. So this is the line, if we follow, then I think GCP will be taken care of. With that, I thank you again. Now over to organizer for next deliberations. So over to Tripathi sir.
So thank you very much, Dr. Shambhu, and it was quite exhaustive, and you have deliberated all the different good clinical practice principles. And this is a very important session, and particularly we need to remind ourselves about the definitions, the two components contained in the definition, as has been very clearly described by Dr. Shambhu. One is about the data credibility, quality of data, scientific data, and that's all about the study design, study methods, reliability of the data. And the second is about the ethics part of it, and that is protecting the integrity, confidentiality of the study participants. That's the ethical aspect. But these two are clubbed together in good clinical practice, and as the definition starts, it actually provides you the standard or the benchmark. What is the minimum standard for acceptability of the data? Because why it also has ethical connotation, although people may argue that it's scientific part, why should ethics committee bother about it? But then if a research is badly conducted, poorly designed, so that the data are not reliable, what can happen? A drug which otherwise should not have come in the market, it will come, and then it is not really in the best interest of the patients. Okay, if it is not efficacious, and because of the design, it has been shown, but because of the poor methodology, that it has good effect, but actually it doesn't have, that is not acceptable. Okay, so poor science or poor design ultimately also have indirectly ethical connotation. Similarly, on the other hand, if a drug otherwise would have the merit to come in the market, but because of poor science, it loses the chance to come in the market. Then again, the future patients, they are denied of the right to get otherwise what the medicine, which is also not acceptable. It also has ethical connotation. So that's why both these scientific aspect and the direct ethical issues linked to the patient's integrity and confidentiality, safety, etc. So all these are linked together. And there are different stakeholders involved in conduct of clinical research who together in a collaborative manner will ensure the quality of research. Okay, and the research is conducted in ethical manner. So we'll have more discussions on the next session is by Dr. Shreyoshi Dasgupta, who is right now